Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to Finance with Avery. In this video, we're getting into the details and ramifications of the Trump tariffs after the Supreme Court ruling. I'm going to get into what this means for prices, refunds, stimulus, your savings, investments, and more. Let's get right into it here. First, starting with what the Supreme Court ruled. So on February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economics Power Act, the IEEPA, were unlawful. So when you see that IEEPA, that's what it stands for. So the majority held that the IEEPA does not clearly authorize a president to impose broad long-term tariffs, and that authority over tariffs belongs to Congress. So this ruling applies specifically to tariffs imposed using the emergency powers under IEEPA. And now there are other tariffs that are still on the table that are still going through fine, and we'll get into the details of those. So the court did not automatically cancel all tariffs, and they did not determine how refunds will be handled. That now moves to lower court. So this isn't a like it's over, tariffs are done, let's move on to the next thing. This is going to be ongoing pretty much for the rest of the year, maybe even years to come. Information about these tariffs and refunds. Let's get more into the information here about these tariffs and the tariffs that are remaining. So the tariffs that were invalidated, those were the broad global tariffs imposed under IEEPA. Now these raised the average effective United States tariff rate significantly. Estimates are ranging around 15 to 17% at the peak levels. And now these tariffs generated large federal revenues. And that was one of the goals for these tariffs, to generate revenue to pay down the United States debt. So now that these have kind of been taken off the table, there's going to be an issue with that because it was making a dent, we'll say, in the debt. There's a lot of U.S. debt. We won't, that's a whole nother video. We won't even get into that. But U.S. debt is a lot, and the tariffs were trying to make an impact on that. So that was some of the reasoning that President Trump wanted to, go through with the tariffs, and some of them, kind of retaliation, saying the United States has been taken advantage of for years. So just pretty much went into these tariffs as an emergency. But one of the main goals was to drive more revenue for the United States. And part of that was going to pay down debt. And some of that was supposedly going to go towards stimulus checks to citizens, to you and I. However, even with those tariffs that were invalidated, there are still some tariffs in place. So this new Supreme Court ruling does not affect tariffs imposed under other laws, including Section 232. Now, this is the national security tariffs, which include steel, aluminum, autos, think of more manufacturing type of materials. So those tariffs are still ongoing. And also Section 301 tariffs, especially the China-related trade actions, and also the anti-dumping and countervailing duty tariff. Now, Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 is designed to combat unfair trade practices. So in 2026, these remain the backbone of the whole United States, China trade relationship, or tension, however you want to call it. And so the current status of these were unaffected by the February 20th ruling. Now, unlike the IEEPA tariffs, which were based on emergencies like the fentanyl crisis or immigration, Section 301 tariffs are based on years-long investigation into intellectual property and forced technology transfer. Now, throughout 2025, the administration expanded these to include strategic sectors. And so what are those strategic sectors, you may be wondering? EVs, electric vehicles, solar cells, semiconductors, steel and aluminum from China. These still have tariff rates on them. Now, there are some exclusions that don't get hit with tariffs. Now, as of December 2025, there was about 178 specific product exclusions that were extended until November 10th, 2026. So this means that certain goods like specific types of machinery and medical components can still enter the United States duty-free or at lower rates because they can't be sourced outside of China. The AD/CVD targets specific products that are hurting American companies. Anti-dumping is applied when a foreign company sells a product in the United States at a lower price than its cost of production or its home market value. So that's called dumping. So those tariffs still in place. The countervailing duties, the CVD, That's applied when a foreign government provides unfair subsidies like tax breaks or cheap loans to its manufacturers, allowing them to undercut United States prices. So tariffs on those items still happening. Now, something recent that just happened on February 23rd, 2026, the Commerce Department continued the AD anti-dumping orders on the electrolytic manganese dioxide from China, which is proving that these cases continue to roll forward regardless of the Supreme Court's ruling on emergency powers. So it's still going to be a lot of ongoing tariffs and rulings and legislation around these emergency power tariffs. It's like, okay, those got struck down, but let's go about tariffs in another way. And now these have a stacking effect. So the tariffs could be even more for certain items. So you could have a Chinese steel pipe that has 25% tariffs placed on it because of the Section 301 tariffs. And then there could be a 40% tariff on that because of the AD/CVD duty. So the total tax tariff at the border could be about 65% on something. So it can jump up even more and stack on top certain items because of it falling under certain circumstances. So you could think of the United States trade policy like a fortress. The Supreme Court just knocked down the emergency gates, the IEEPA tariffs, but the concrete wall, so to speak, Section 301, and the whole moat with the anti-dumping and countervailing duty tariffs are still standing. So these laws have been in the books since the 70s, 80s, or whatnot, and they've survived decades of legal challenges. And so chances of them going anywhere anytime soon are low. I mean, but of course, anything's possible is going on right now, of course. But these have been ongoing. These are still ongoing. And now the administration response to the Supreme Court striking down the tariffs via the IEEPA. So following the ruling, the Trump administration announced a new temporary global tariff of 15%, which is the maximum under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, this allows temporary tariffs for a balance of payment purposes. So these new Section 122 tariffs have a mandatory 150-day expiration date. So they'll be expiring roughly January 2026 unless Congress explicitly votes to extend them. So this is another reason why you're going to continue seeing information about tariffs in the news, in the headlines, affecting prices, affecting investments, affecting the market, and so forth. So some tariffs were invalidated, but others still remain. Now, why this matters for prices? Will prices go down? Will they go up? What's going on with that? So experts are mixed upon this. So a lot of economists state that the tariffs function like a tax on imported goods, in stating that businesses often pass some of that cost to customers, likely could be linked to the tariffs and of course inflation ongoing. Now a lot of economists state that removing the tariffs reduces a layer of cost in the supply chains. So when companies have to pay more for goods, how are they going to react to that? A lot of companies raise their prices to offset the amount that they had to pay increasing for the tariffs and everything. So you can see how the cost can be passed along right there. And I think that was one of the reasons why Trump wanted to do the tariff dividend, the stimulus checks, in regards to the tariffs, with them bringing in more money to try to offset, like, hey, I know you all are paying more money because of these tariffs, but I love tariffs. It's one of my favorite words. I'm pretty sure he stated that. But to kind of offset that, to keep good favor with the United States citizens, that stimulus check was going to be that kind of like, hey, it's okay type of thing. Like, you're paying more, but here's, what was it going to be? $2,000, a couple $1,000s, something like that. And so that was part of the reason why that was kind of stated to happen. Now with the tariffs being struck down, we'll get into more of that later of whether or not that's going to happen. Now, what's uncertain? Speaking of uncertainty, price relief is unlikely to be immediate. With the Supreme Court ruling just happening the other day, it's very unlikely that you're going to walk into the grocery stores or the retail outlet or wherever and just notice that, wow, prices are all so much lower. The same thing I bought last week or last month is like 20% less or 15%, 10% less. Highly unlikely that's going to happen. So businesses aren't likely going to be quick to lower prices. A lot of businesses may just think like, hey, we were selling this much of these items at this price and it was fine. And now it's going to cost us less for these items. Let's just keep selling these items at this price, and then we'll increase our profit margin. So, that's likely. Some companies may say, no, let's bring the price down for our customers. Others, not so much. Others, certain items maybe. So it's kind of a mixed bag that's going to happen with prices in various places that you're going to be shopping and buying. Of course, some tariffs, like we just went over, still remain intact. So even though Supreme Court invalidated certain tariffs, it doesn't mean that everything is just going down in prices for companies out there. Some items will, some items are still going to have the tariffs on them. And then of course you got the Section 122 15% tariffs, which actually I believe started as 10% via Trump, and then he raised it up to the maximum of 15%. So you got those tariffs going on right now, at least temporarily. And so you got supply chain contracts and inventory cycles that are delaying changes as well. So instant price relief because of this ruling, very unlikely. So the impact upon households range from, a few hundred, several $100s to thousands of dollars possibly, depending on certain assumptions, what you bought. Did you buy a car? Were you buying furniture? So it very much ranges as far as like how much more was spent via households because of the tariffs. Now, it is pretty much agreed upon through a lot of experts that prices in general did raise almost across the board. So households in general were paying more across the board, but that amount ranges. And of course that varied by not only just the households, but by sector as well. Some sectors saw more price increases than others. Now, what is the impact on the stimulus tariff checks? If you remember last year, it was touted and stated by President Trump that stimulus is on the way. The tariff dividends is what they're called, are on the way. I made videos about these in case you want to check out the information on them and what was stated at the time by who, what, when, and where. So links to those in the description. So as I stated in those videos, President Trump stated that tariff revenue was going to fund direct payments to you and I, United States citizens, in form of a tariff dividend. That was going to be the name of it, something like that. Stimulus checks, basically tariff stimulus checks. People had different names for it, but the basis of it was the same. That was going to be paid via the tariffs. That's how they're going to fund that. Now, those proposals relied on projected revenue from the now invalidated tariffs. And before these tariffs were even invalidated, there was still nothing in law, nothing specific stating, on this day, these people are going to get this much money. And then these people, if you qualify for this, it was still pretty rough as far as is that going to happen or not. And like I stated in my videos, don't count on that money coming. It's not a guarantee. Don't go ahead and plan for it. Treat it as a surprise, because at the time it seemed kind of unlikely that was going to happen. Now, so it seems even more unlikely that the tariff stimulus, tariff dividend checks will happen. Now, with a lot of those tariffs invalidated, funding tariff dividend checks, where is that going to come from? So there was no enacted law guaranteeing tariff stimulus dividend checks then, and there's still no enacted law guaranteeing them now. So as of now, if refunds occur, they would go to the importers who paid the tariffs, not automatically to households. So there is a chance that you've already seen some headlines, tariff refunds, and there's a chance you'll continue seeing these headlines, tariff refunds coming or tariff refunds in discussion at Congress, something like that. There's a high likelihood that tariff refunds they're talking about aren't refunds to you and I. These refunds would be paid to the importers who paid the increased prices due to the tariffs that were ruled invalid. So yes, tariff refunds now are taking on a whole different meaning than what they were some months ago last year as far as tariff refund checks to households, to you and I, U.S. citizens. So that's the situation with the stimulus checks from the tariff revenue. But what's going to happen next? There's still a lot of uncertainty going on, the refunds, the legal process, new tariff strategies, and so forth. And likely these headlines and these situations are going to continue throughout the year. And one thing that's still up for debate that hasn't been clarified specifically is the amount of tariffs that will be refunded if they are to be refunded. So various institutions have different amounts for the actual tariff revenue that was collected under the IEEPA. And those estimates range from like $100 billion up to like $200 billion. So you'll see like $165 billion, $135 billion for the tariff refunds. Different amounts are still being floated out there. And also the refund amount will vary depending on various factors, including the eligible claims, who's actually eligible for the refunds, the time limits in place for the refunds, whether interest is included. If it takes a while for the refunds to be paid, typically sometimes what's going to be added on, some form of interest could happen. And also court rulings on administrative mechanics of it. How is this going to happen in place? When, what, where, and how? And there are over 1,000 companies out there that are actually suing the Trump administration. Some of the companies that are suing the Trump administration include, there's a lot of them here. So FedEx, Costco, Staples, Barnes & Noble, Dyson, L'Oreal, Revlon, Bath & Body Works, J. Crew, Reebok, Puma, Uniqlo, Lululemon, Goodyear Tire and Rubber, Xerox, Peloton, Dole Fresh Fruit. Where's our money at? We paid this extra money because of the tariffs. That could either speed up things or slow down things because you have those legal proceedings as well. So a lot of uncertainty going on with these refunds. And the timeline for this, importers may need to file individual claims. And that's a lot of companies that will be filing individual claims. So you can imagine it took this long for the tariffs to be ruled illegal. How long do you think it would take for a refund process to go back for thousands of companies out there? So yeah, these cases could move through the Court of International Trades, which could take years, not even months, to go through and be finalized. And now there are also new tariff pathways being considered because President Trump loves tariffs. I made part of these slides, right when the ruling was announced, and then I just kind of waited a bit until see what the aftermath was from it with President Trump, and then also the State of the Union address. So they've already initiated Section 122, the temporary tariffs. That's going on in place right now. As I stated earlier in the video, the 15%, that's the maximum for those tariffs. And then also they could expand Section 301 trade investigations. So we talked about that earlier in the video. They could expand that. And also they could broaden Section 232 national security tariffs to include more materials and products and deem it as a security threat. And then they can also work with Congress to pass new tariff legislation. So it could be the tariffs that were deemed unlawful, you could find a workaround, different wording, something else to go on with those to impose those tariffs again. So what does this mean for your money? So prices, we talked about prices some, and there could be some long-term easing of import costs. That is possible. Nothing immediate and nothing for certain right now, but there could be some long-term easing of prices down the road here. And now, not all tariffs were removed. So even though the Supreme Court ruled that those tariffs under IEEPA were deemed unlawful, those weren't all the tariffs that were happening. The tariffs that are already happening that weren't deemed illegal, they're continuing. They're not stopping because of this. And so pricing adjustments may be slow and uneven. Certain sectors, certain companies, and so forth. Now, budgeting. What are you thinking about with budgeting with this? So you can continue monitoring core spending categories. What are you spending more money in, and has that been increasing? What's going on with your main core spending? Do you need to shop around more for prices more so than you have in the past? And now inflation, of course, we can't get through this video. I'm pretty sure I've already mentioned inflation at least once or twice, but you can't talk about prices and tariffs and this and that without mentioning inflation, because that's still definitely happening and ongoing, raising in certain areas, lowering in certain areas. And so inflation impact depends on how much cost savings is getting passed through. With inflation, something that's definitely not going away anytime soon and could be ramped up depending on what's going on with the Federal Reserve. So that's still ongoing about Fed rate cuts and so forth. So inflation is something you still want to keep your eye on. Now, investments. With investing in the stock market. Now, as you've seen throughout the year, if you've been paying attention, this year, even last year, for sure, when the tariffs were announced on Liberation Day, the market reacts to tariffs very much so, sometimes more than others, depending on how big the headline is. And so there's that trade uncertainty, which I stated before, what I like to use as an opportunity to increase positions in solid companies and ETFs. So there's going to be that trade uncertainty continuing to go on. And then also the federal revenue implications. And then you have also the potential new tariffs and the expiration of tariffs, because the Section 122 tariffs have that 150-day expiration unless they're extended. So throughout the year, there's going to be certain times that the market's going to be reacting to tariffs that are in place, expiring possibly, renewing possibly, and so forth. Now that's about the finances for you and I, prices, investments, budgeting. What about the government finances? So if refunds are significant, federal revenue could decline relative to prior projections. Federal revenue is increasing because of the tariffs. Now those tariffs have been stricken down. However, other tariffs are in place still that are still continuing to bring in revenue. With those other tariffs being deemed illegal, and then the actual refunds that may go through, that's going to take a hit to the federal revenue. And future trade, tax policy changes, and possible new tariffs, extension of tariffs, that could offset some of that. But government finances are going to be pretty shaky right now as well, because they were kind of, I won't say depending on those tariffs, but those were like projected into future forecasts about, government finances and so forth. Now with that taken away and the uncertainty of the refunds and other tariffs, it's going to be kind of questionable with some of the data that you see out there. Nothing's going to be pretty much for certain. It's going to be a lot of estimates and projections and so forth that are based on the information's out there, but not any direct key details and facts because of the uncertainty that's still ongoing. So yeah, a lot of information to soak up, absorb, and think about when it comes to these tariffs and the Supreme Court ruling and the previous tariffs, current tariffs, future tariffs, and your money and what's going to happen with it. And I hope this video was informative for you. Be sure to like it down below if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Much appreciated. Take care.